A year after the American victory over the British at Yorktown, Virginia in October of 1781, General George Washington moved a large part of his army to New Windsor for winter quarters, or what's called a cantonment. And that's right here, that's where we're standing. Here, some 7,000 troops, accompanied by about 500 women and children, built log huts for shelter, they drilled, and they kept ready for a possible spring campaign if peace negotiations in France weren't successful. Despite the lack of battles in the nearby area towards the end of the war, the cantonment was not always peaceful. There were a lot of problems here. Congress did not have the power to tax, and a lot of the soldiers and officers weren't paid. And it was in this building that the Newburgh Conspiracy was put down by General George Washington in 1783. The Newberg Conspiracy was a plan by the Continental Army officers to challenge the authority of Congress, arising from their frustration with Congress's long-standing inability to meet its financial obligations to the military. By early 1783, widespread unrest had created an atmosphere ripe for mutiny. And in this building, George Washington spoke to his officers and stopped the Newburgh Conspiracy. Behind me is the monument to the cantonment here in 1782 and 1783. It commemorates the birth of the Republic. In many ways, our country was born here. This is the last encampment of the Continental Army. And to make sure that everyone remembers it, in 1891, this monument was erected. The cantonment held about 7,000 soldiers, and log cabins needed to be constructed for these guys to live in. Behind me is a typical log cabin, about 35 feet by 18 feet, and it would have held about 32 soldiers. And this would have been their quarters for at least a year or so. Obviously, there would be no indoor plumbing or anything like that, so the conditions weren't that great, but it was shelter, and the Army needed that shelter until the end of the war. By the end of the war, 1781, 82, 83, there were new uniform regulations for the Continental Army. Continental Army got much more professional looking. They got more wool from France and better uniforms. So by the end of the war, the mid-Atlantic states like New York and Pennsylvania, their troops basically got this kind of uniform, blue with buff. New England states got blue with white, and the southern states got blue with red. So by the end of the war, the Continental Army is much better uniformed and looks much more professional. Behind me is Noxus Headquarters, or what's called Noxus Headquarters, State Historic Site. It's actually used by a number of American commanders throughout the war. Horatio Gates, Henry Knox, both used this as a headquarters at different years. Now, the house itself was owned by John Ellison, who built the house in 1754. He also owned a grist mill nearby, and this would have been a highway for the Continental Army towards the end of the war. If you follow me down this path, there's a stream down here where the grist mill would have been. Beautiful site, very important to the American cause, and certainly a place you should visit.